Outbreak. Amy decided she was fighting mankind's most ancient battle: physical impulse versus human dignity. Her bladder felt like it was filled with knives, but the bus toilet was not something a human should be allowed to touch without wearing a wetsuit. Would she give in to animal impulse and surrender her human dignity? She would not. Actually, she tried to go back there about 15 minutes ago, but it was occupied, and there was a guy in there making really weird noises. So, she was back in her seat, counting the miles to the nearest bathroom. Not far now. They were right outside of town, already past the tractor dealership. On the seat next to her was a white cardboard box from a bakery not too far from the university, containing what was probably the finest food ever produced by the human species. They were red velvet cupcakes with a cheesecake filling and a cream cheese icing. There were only half a dozen in the box, but you could barely finish one of them before you had to go sit down somewhere and stare at the ceiling. It'd sit in your belly like a bag of concrete, but you'd have no regrets. The fat and sugar hit your system so hard that with every bite, you just wanted to give the world a hug. Oh no. The bus was stopping. Amy stood up and saw cars. Cars and cars and cars stopped dead on the highway leading into town. Her heart sank. This was surely just a car accident or something. Not every bad thing that happened revolved around David. Surely. She was already dialing, but this time, no voicemail. A recorded message from the cell phone carrier saying all circuits were busy. A helicopter swept overhead. Low. Oh, crap. Across the aisle of the bus, a couple of college-looking guys in vintage clothes and thick-rimmed glasses were whispering frantically to each other, huddled over the screen of a cell phone. Excuse me, are you guys getting a signal? Internet still works, look. The guy held out the phone and Twitter was up. If you're reading this in a future where the Twitter fad is past, Twitter was a website where people posted short little messages, usually from their phones, for the world to see. So, at any moment, you could go on their site and see what the world at large was talking about, in real time. The main page of Twitter would always list what subjects were hot or trending at the moment. So when news broke, it broke on Twitter first. If a plane crashed near New York, people on the scene would start tweeting about it within seconds, long before the first news camera showed up. Within minutes, you'd see hashtag NY plane crash pop up on the trending topics. The number one topic on Twitter at this moment was hashtag zombie outbreak. Exodus. John's old Caddy had a huge engine that would qualify as a human rights violation if built today. It roared down the road, chugging gas and farting a blue cloud of dinosaur souls. "They're sealing off the town!" John screamed over John Fogarty. "Munch told me they've got the highway and Route 44 both blocked." We weren't heading to the highway, however. We would never have made it even without the roadblock. John's Caddy wasn't exactly hard to spot, and we were being pursued. Fortunately, we knew a shortcut. John tossed his phone into my lap and said, "Call Shiva. Tell her to meet us at the water tower." "Who?" "Shiva, my girlfriend." "That's actually her name?" "I think so." "There are absolutely no bars on this phone." I pulled out mine and said, "Shit, mine too." God damn, we get shitty coverage here. burrito stand. The tires screeched us to a stop. We spilled out and I yelled, "Trunk! Trunk!" John stopped in his tracks and said, "Molly!" I spun and there she was. She was by the trash can, her paws pinning down a scrap of aluminum foil while she hurriedly ate the remaining half of a chorizo burrito. John fumbled with his keys and got the trunk open just as we heard in the distance, "Don't fucking move." Goddamned Lance Falconer, sprinting down the street, gun in hand. Holy shit, that man could run. I abandoned my stuff and sprinted to the back door of the burrito stand. The good news was it would get us out of here. The bad news was that the destination was a crapshoot, and only one would work. Come on. Water tower, water tower, water tower. We opened the door and squeezed into the utility closet. A blink later, the door changed in front of us, and we stepped out to... Panties! Shit! We were at the Walmart dressing room. No good. If the feds had blocked off the highway at city limits, we were still on the wrong side of it. John said, "Back in, back in!" Back into the dressing room. A blink. The smell of burritos hit us. We stepped out of the door at the exact moment Falconer skidded to a stop in front of us. He leveled his huge automatic at my face and said, "Freeze!" We ducked back inside. I heard Falconer yanking the door back open a split second before we emerged at a destination that stank of liquor and disinfectant. "Shit!" hissed John, surveying a display of Jägermeister. "We're at the liquor store." Specifically, the restroom at the rear of the store. "What now?" Maybe if we wait here, he'll wander away. He's not going to do that. He'll search the burrito stand for a hidden hatch or something. Then he'll search our car and interrogate the burrito guy to see if he's in on it. I glanced around. What's going on? The liquor store was packed. People were hauling armloads of bottles up to the counter, and somebody was arguing with the cashier. People stocking up. Screw it. He won't be expecting us to pop back out. We'll go out and right back in. Third time's a charm. We shoved back into the liquor store restroom just as a guy nearby piled Jaeger and a half a dozen Red Bulls into a shopping basket. A blink. Burrito smell. I peeked out of the utility closet. A hand grabbed my collar and threw me to the ground, knocking the air from my lungs. A knee was on my back. Falconer screamed. "How are you doing that?" "We told you, just fucking let us go." "Shitbird," Falconer growled. "You need to understand that it's going to be martial law and rioting within the hour. That means if I put a bullet in both of your heads and leave you here, nobody will fucking care." I said, listen to me. Everything that has happened because they wanted it to." "Who's they?" "I don't know. Find out. You're goddamn Lance Falconer." John said, "Don't you get it? You're wasting your time. We're just a couple of inconsequential dipshits in this whole thing. The people behind this will take out all three of us. We're all pawns. Well, you're a pawn. We're a couple of gummy bears your retarded little brother stuck on the chessboard." I felt the knee lift from my back. I looked up at Falconer towering over me. I met his eyes and found it easier to look into the barrel of his gun. He said, "See, I would let you go so you can try to jump the quarantine, but I would like to not be responsible for destroying the world today. I'd sooner let everybody in this town pass those barricades before you two fucks. I don't know if you've noticed, but disaster follows you everywhere you goddamn go. Now, we're gonna... Ugh! An orange blur had attached itself to Falconer's crotch. It was Molly, her teeth buried right in the detective's junk. John grabbed my jacket and we stumbled into the closet. I pulled the door shut. Cornfield. Yes! Screamed John. We stepped out of a blue porta potty, the middle one in a row of 3 at the edge of the construction site. To our right was the legs of a half-finished water tower. In our various experiments with the doors over the months, we'd only found one, this one, that took you outside city limits. But not by much. No more than a quarter mile to the south of us, we could see dots of military vehicles parked alongside a road bisecting the field. A little bit of the cordon encircling the city. John pulled out his phone and said, no reception. Man, you think they're jamming the signal? Dunno. If so, we just gotta get far enough away. They're not blocking it for all of America, right? Well, highway's about a quarter mile that way. We went stomping across the expanse of broken corn stalks and mud of the harvest cornfield, tracing a similar path from that summer night when we saw the black convoy and found the box. 15 minutes later, we got a good look at the traffic jam on the highway. A line of cars that extended across the horizon as far as we could see in both directions. In the distance to our left was the roadblock, a cluster of flashing police lights, Humvees, and the muted echo of somebody shouting into a megaphone. They were trying to get the cars to cross the median and go back the way they came, but due to people refusing to comply, or confusion, or just the general dipshit dysfunction of crowds, the whole process had resulted in gridlock. We both flinched as a helicopter swept overhead. A day and a half ago, I was at work playing browser games on the PC and trying to think of what to get Amy for her birthday. Suddenly, it's the freaking apocalypse. John glanced at his phone, then stuffed it back in his pocket. 10 minutes later, we made it out of the cornfield and onto the grass along the shoulder of the road. We took a right, putting undisclosed to our backs. To our left was a wall of cars and semis forming an automotive Great Wall of China that snaked over the next hill. When we crested that hill, we saw that the shopping center just outside of town, a U-shaped strip of stores encircling 3 sides of a huge parking lot, had become a gathering place for refugees. The parking lot was packed with vehicles, and more were parked in the grass along the entrance leading in. As we got closer, we saw people standing around, on their phones, trying to get in touch with loved ones behind the barricades. That prompted John to pull out his phone. I've got bars. Well, a bar. He dialed and said, "Hey, Shiva, it's me." Huh? No, look, Sheila. Dave and I need a ride. We're right outside that strip mall with the Best Buy. They got the roads all blocked. What? Yeah, I don't know. Did you say zombies? No, your friends are morons. What? No. Why would we have anything to do with it? Uh-huh, that's fine. Can you still pick us up? Hello? Shiva? He put the phone away and said, "Call got dropped. Also, I think she broke up with me." I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but, did zombies come up in that conversation? Yeah. Apparently the internet is full of zombie rumors. People are stupid. I mean, I guess that's not any stupider than the truth. We made it to the shopping center parking lot. On one end was the Best Buy. On the other was a now closed movie theater. Between the two was a row of storefronts, half of them unoccupied. John said, "I didn't know they had a Cinnabon out here." Look, we gotta get a ride, John. My feet are killing me. We walked past a parked Greyhound bus and John said, "You think they'd let us on there?" The bus was empty. I said, "I don't know. Where's it going?" Who cares? Good point. Find the driver and see if you can buy a ticket. Or bribe him. I have $4. Look, I have $0. You might have to blow him. I peered through the smoked front windows of the Best Buy and saw the store was absolutely packed with people, staring up at a massive bank of televisions along the wall. We went in and shouldered our way through the crowd. They were watching live news coverage of the chaos in Undisclosed on 36 flat-screen TVs of various sizes. The Action 5 news team was finding as many ways as they could to say the same thing over and over, that there was some kind of unspecified crisis in town, that they didn't know the nature of it, but that it was huge and terrible, and that we should all remain calm but glued to our televisions. Then they threw it out to the star reporter Kathy Bortz, who was standing about 1 block from my house. "Thank you, Michael." Look behind me. Fire trucks, police cars, military Humvees. A large RV that appears to be a mobile command center from the Centers for Disease Control. Numerous civilian vehicles. Behind them, a raging house fire. There is mass confusion here, folks. We heard gunshots when we first arrived. We have been told there are at least 3 bodies, but that's all we know. Personnel are... What was that? Did you catch that, Steve? Back on me. Ready? Personnel are swarming the scene. They're trying to push back onlookers. As you can see, quite a crowd has gathered around. Information has been hard to come by, but what we know is that this is the same address where less than an hour ago, neighbors called in reports of a shouting, bloody, naked man carrying what appeared to be... What's that? Steve? No, there's something on my... Ugh! Kathy swatted at her hair, like a woman who has realized a bee is nested there. Only 2 people in the Best Buy saw that it was not a bee. She screamed. There was another scream, a man this time. Her camera guy, apparently, because the screen jerked and suddenly we were looking at the reporter's feet. She wore tennis shoes. I always remember that part. The knees of her pantsuit came into frame next. She was shrieking, convulsing. She fell flat into the grass. While the Action 5 News audience watched, the face of Kathy Bortz fell into frame. A 3-inch long strip of flesh was missing from her forehead, pink skull showing in the gash. Gasps from the crowd around us. On the screen, Bortz shrieked and shrieked. The strip of eaten flesh on her face grew, edging down across her eyebrow. The invisible to everybody else carnivore quickly chewed across her eyelid, then dug into her eyeball, spilling pale fluid down across the bridge of her nose. The shot cut back to the male and female anchors. Perfect-haired anchor Michael McCreary blinked, looked off camera and said, "What the fuck?" His female co-anchor turned to lean behind the desk and vomited. The air in the store was charged with panic. That bottled-up, impotent panic of a crowd that doesn't know how to act on it. Should they riot? Loot the place? Burn it down? Should they stampede out of there? To where? Cinnabon? Instead, everybody just kind of stood shoulder to shoulder, mumbling to each other. A black woman next to me was crying, covering her mouth with one hand. My cell phone screamed, and 6 people around me almost shit their pants. On the screen, it said, "Amy." "Amy, can you hear me?" "Yes." "Did you hear the news?" "Yes, David. Listen to me. We're okay. John and I both. We got out of town. Now, we may have to come up there and stay with you for a bit. We can't go back to town because... David, stop talking. Did you not get any of my voicemails? I got on a bus to Undisclosed this morning. Shit, turn around. Amy, it's chaos in there. Get off at the next stop and... The background noise had cut off from her end, and I knew the call had gotten dropped. No bars on the phone. Shit, John, she's on her way down here. No, that's good news, man. She'll be coming in on the highway, right? We'll figure out how far the bus got and we'll meet her there. Hell, if we head north, we'll run into her at some point. My phone screamed again. Text message this time, from Amy. The message said simply, "What is happening?" There was a photo attached. I opened it. All of the warmth in my body drained out through my feet, all my life and strength forming a puddle on the tile floor. The photo was of my burning house, taken from not 20 feet away. I sat down, an act that was not entirely voluntary. I was in a forest of legs. My head was swimming. John was talking to me. Dave, what's happening? She's at my... I swallowed. She's in my fucking house, John. Amy. She took the bus this morning and she went to my house. To find me. I'm sure she's fine. She's smarter than both of us put together. I have to go back for her. You're damned right. He pulled me to my feet. I shoved my way through the crowd, knocking rudely through shoulders and elbows. In the parking lot, John said, "All we got to do is get back to the water tower, take the door, get back to the burrito stand. With any luck, the caddy will still be there. We can't walk. We have to borrow a vehicle. Something that can drive right the hell across that cornfield. Look," he pointed, left of the Greyhound. There was a very muddy pickup on jacked up suspension. In the bed was an equally muddy dirt bike. I was praying that the keys were in the truck. They weren't, and the truck was locked. Looking around nervously, we rolled the bike out of the truck bed. I had only driven a motorcycle twice in my life and hadn't crashed either time. John had actually owned one a few years ago, but he had crashed it twice. We didn't discuss it. I jumped on and John climbed on behind me. I kicked it to life and we were off. Across the parking lot, onto the grass, into the stubble and mud of the cornfield. We bounced along the ruts and John had his arm around my ribcage so tight I thought he was breaking bones. I told him to loosen up because I couldn't breathe. I aimed the bike right at the vertical columns of the tower, brown at the seams where they had been welding the plates together. I saw the blue porta-potty at the base as it grew out of a speck in the distance. November wind froze my ears and cheeks. I felt like I was watching myself do all of it from afar. They couldn't have Amy. They could have me. They could have John. They could have undisclosed in the Midwest in America. I'll cede all of that to them, whoever they are. But don't get Amy. She's off the table. Amy had already lost her family in that car accident years ago, the same one that took her hand and left her tethered to a bottle of pain pills she could never allow out of her sight. She lost her brother. She lost her home. The world owed her more than it would ever be able to repay. But by God, it was going to have to try. The reporter's face kept flashing through my mind, a flesh-eating spider chewing through her eye. Stop it. And Amy was closer than that, closer to the infested house than the reporter. How in the hell had she gotten so close? Why didn't they stop her? Maybe the National Guard had gotten her by now, or the CDC. Maybe they'd just hold on to her until they got all of this under control. They'll never get this under control. I was numb all over, a combination of the cold and the vibration and the panic and exhaustion. I couldn't feel the bike jolting over the ruts in the field. I couldn't feel John's arms around me. I couldn't feel the half-dozen wounds that had been complaining all over my body. I pulled up to the porta-potty, found the kickstand, and said, "If it looks like the feds have it under control, we find somebody in charge and..." John was not there. I jumped off the bike and looked back. There was a tiny figure way off in the distance, frantically waving his arms and running. He had fallen off somewhere around the first third of the trip. No time to wait for him. I pulled out my phone and wrote out a message to him in an unsent text telling him to give us 30 minutes to get back before getting as far away as he could. Somebody had to stay on the other side of those barricades. I left the message on the screen and laid the phone on the seat of the dirt bike. Couldn't use it in town anyway. I went to the door of the middle porta potty and whispered, "Burrito stand." To be clear, the doors absolutely did not work that way. It was just wishful thinking, or a prayer. I opened it and stepped inside. The plastic porta potty door clapped shut behind me. I knew I wasn't at the burrito stand. There were no burrito smells. There was noise. Panic from outside. I opened the door and had a split second to register that I was in the restroom at BB's. Shouted commands, panicked screams, gunshots. I wanted to turn back to the door to retreat to the field. Instead, I found a gun barrel pointed at my face. I threw up my hands. "No, don't." Leviticus. John heard muffled gunshots as he approached the toilet, and they sounded close. Sound waves are a funny thing, but he swore the noise was coming from inside the blue plastic shitter. He reached the door and was about to yank it open when he had second thoughts. Wait, if there were dudes with guns at the other end of the door, or portal, or wormhole, could they shoot through it? Was that what he heard? If he opened it, would a haul of bullets fly out? Would a dude with a machine gun spring out at him? Or had some soldier or cop been taking a shit when Dave burst in? So now the two of them were having a gunfight, pressed chest to chest in the tiny booth. Unarmed and with no other plans for the day, John took a deep breath and pulled open the door. Filthy, chemical toilet. A crumpled bag of Doritos on the plastic floor. Empty toilet paper roll. John climbed inside, closed the door. Nothing happened. You could feel when the doors worked. There was a change in the air and a slight smell like the gas that comes out of aerosol cans of whipped cream before the cream comes out. When he opened the door, he was unsurprised to find it was just field again. He tried it 10 more times. Finally, he gave up and stepped out of the booth and noticed something for the first time. Blood splattered on the inside of the door. Blood and bits of pink something. Brains. That he couldn't identify. In that instance, the whole sequence suddenly made sense. John sat down in the cornfield and tried to think of a dozen ways to talk himself out of it. The same rationalization, the exact same, that was running through the heads of dozens and dozens of people inside those army barriers up ahead. The families of those firemen, and the friends and coworkers of that reporter, and all the other people who had died in an instant when everything went to shit. Death was something that happened to other people. Strangers. Extras in the background. We don't die. They die. John lit a cigarette. He finished it. He climbed on board the dirt bike and said, out loud, "All those fuckers are gonna pay." 30 minutes earlier. A half hour earlier, while Dave and John were still trudging across a cornfield after having emerged from the water tower porta potty, Amy was finding it hard to breathe. Everybody on the bus was restless and nervous, bottled up in there with each other, cut off from the outside world. The phones were dead. Traffic had stopped. Cars in front, cars behind. She was sick with worry and she had to pee so bad she didn't know if she could actually make it through the process of standing, walking to the back, and sitting down again on a toilet. The bus driver got up and announced that he had gotten word over the radio that the highway had been shut down for the rest of the day, and maybe the next, due to a chemical spill. The two guys in the seats across the aisle scoffed. They really wanted it to be zombies. The driver said there was a shopping center ahead, that traffic was being diverted there, and that once there, the passengers would have the option of arranging further transportation, or reboarding the bus and taking it back through the stops in reverse order. All Amy knew was that there were stores at the shopping center and that those stores had bathrooms. After that, it would just be a matter of finding another route into town. If she had to walk, she'd walk. She hadn't brought walking shoes, but it wasn't that far. She'd show up at David's front door with cupcakes and show him the blisters on her feet, and he'd give her a hug and try to peel clothes off of her. Then they'd sit on his porch in the autumn chill and eat cupcakes and drink some of that amazing coffee from that Cuban place. And they'd talk about whatever the situation was, and laugh about the internet dorks giddily whispering about zombies. The bus veered off onto the shoulder and rode it until the turn lane for the shopping center. As soon as it rolled to a stop, Amy shakily headed for the nearest doorway. She wasn't even paying attention to what store she walked into. She just knew that on her day's trip to the restroom, she passed a lot of televisions and cell phone kiosks and a gauntlet of muttering, worried people. She sat the cupcakes on a shelf outside the door because it seemed weird to take them in. It's amazing how your body affects your outlook on the world. Using the bathroom and walking around and splashing some water on her face, it made all the difference in the world. With that physical tension gone, the situation seemed so much less bleak. She probably wouldn't have to make the hike into town. Surely there had to be another route. One of those gravel back roads that looped around the cornfields. If nothing else, then find somebody in the parking lot going that way. She wasn't sure why the bus didn't just take one of them, but maybe that they had some kind of policy against leaving the main roads. Amy emerged from the bathroom, grabbed her cupcakes, and caught a new, weird vibe in the store. Everybody was standing and gawking in the same direction. She followed their gaze and saw they were watching Best Buy's row of huge TVs, all of which were tuned to the local news. It cut to the anchor, who said a curse word she had never heard used on the news before, and his co-anchor leaned over and started gagging. What in the world? Amy almost asked the lady next to her what was going on, but then she noticed somebody talking on their phone and pulled out hers. Service was back. She dialed and... Amy, can you hear me? Yes. Did you hear the news? Yes, David. Listen to me. We're okay. John and I both, we got out of town. Now, we may have to come up there and stay with you for a bit. We can't go back to town because... David, stop talking. Did you not get any of my voicemails? I got on the bus to Undisclosed this morning. Shit. The phone cut out. David, can you hear me? What's going on? The internet thinks there are Nope. Call got dropped. She redialed and immediately got that stupid "all circuits are busy" message. The scene on the TV changed, and suddenly she was looking at David's house and... Oh my God. It was on fire. Why would that happen? Did David even know? She held up the phone, zoomed in on the TV screen, and snapped a shot of the burning house. Juggling the cupcake box so she could text with her one hand, she sent David a simple message. What is happening? It said it was sent. Who knows if it actually got through? Meanwhile, the room around her was freaking out. People were murmuring and crying and arguing and cursing at their phones. Somebody rudely slammed into her from behind on their way to the door. She dropped the cupcake box, but it landed right side up, so she thought it was okay. She needed to find a chair. She needed to sit and breathe and wait to hear from David and focus on not crying. They sold office chairs over at the far side of the store, and there were people sitting in them, but something about the sight of the short redhead fighting back tears made 3 different guys give up their seats at the same time. She took the one in the middle. She waited and waited. She tried to call. Circuit's busy. It wasn't as bad as she was making it out to be. Didn't David say they had made it out of town and that they were fine? That's what mattered. She suddenly realized how hungry she was. Was there anything to eat at this place other than those disgusting cinnamon rolls at Cinnabon? There wasn't. 10 minutes later, she sat at a table by the window, picking tiny bits off of an enormous sticky cinnamon roll, and stared at people freaking out in the parking lot. She needed to keep an eye on the bus. It still had her suitcase on board, and she needed to make sure it didn't leave with it. The driver was back at the bus, opening up the luggage compartment to drag out bags for people who were bailing out on the trip. A tall guy with long hair and muddy pants was bothering the driver about something, and the driver was telling him no. The guy reminded her of John. Amy ran out the door and across the pavement as fast as her designed purely with cuteness in mind shoes would let her. John was startled to see her. Before he could speak, she threw her arms around his torso. "Oh, thank God. Oh my God, John. I can't believe you're here." John still looked baffled and said, "Yeah, I fell off. I mean, holy shit, Amy. I thought that... Anyway, it worked out, so great. Great. Oh my God. Yeah." John said, "We should head north, get as far away as we can, and just kind of regroup. Need a ride, though. I'm trying to get a spot on the bus, but apparently that's not allowed." John looked around. Amy looked around. At the exact same time, both of them said, "Where's David?" Revelation. Vultures. Big, noisy, circling mechanical vultures. That's what Amy thought of as she saw, for the first time in her life, half a dozen helicopters circling around in the same sky. A couple of them were news choppers. The rest looked like army. Buzzing, that soft thwupping fading in and out as their blades chopped up the air. If you ever see more than 2 helicopters over you, you can be sure that something terrible has happened. Amy made John take her out to the water tower and the toilets. John went to the one on the far right and opened it, showing her that it was just a toilet. Showed her that if he went and stood inside, nothing happened. She made him do this about 20 more times. She suggested he try the other 2. He said that he had done that and that they, too, were just toilets. Amy hated crying. She hated crying more than she hated puking. And she would rather puke on live television than cry in front of John right now. She wasn't a large person under normal circumstances, but when she cried, she could feel herself shrink 2 feet. She instantly got demoted to child, everybody making soothing sounds and apologizing for things they didn't even do. Strangers inviting themselves to put an arm around her shoulder like she was a 5-year-old lost at a bus station. And she was a crier. She cried when people yelled at her. She cried when she got frustrated. She cried during particularly sad commercials. But it was just crying. She didn't get hysterical. She didn't fall apart. But everybody treated her like she did because her eyes were so quick to start leaking when things went wrong. And now, as John opened the toilet door, and again she saw nothing but blue plastic walls and a whiff of poop chemicals, she felt that hot sting in her tear ducts and knew they were going to betray her for the 10,000th time. The thwupping got louder, and one of the helicopters seemed to be swooping really low on its passes. It was a huge thing with 2 blades. She could feel their pulsing in her gut. A black semi-truck was turning down the lane, heading right toward them. Watching it warily, John said, "We have to get out of here. We'll regroup and come up with a plan. But if they catch us, then it's over. We can't help him." One more time. John glanced back toward the truck and then toward the tiny army men in the distance and the bright orange fencing they were stretching across the field, sealing off the town behind them. Tiny shouts from a bullhorn were drifting through the air. Yells from angry and scared people. Honking horns. All of it playing under the terrible hollow drumming of the helicopters, the soundtrack of every worst-case scenario. John obeyed. The toilet was just a toilet. You haven't really experienced the full range of human emotion until you've cried your eyes out while hanging on for dear life on the back of a dirt bike bouncing across a cornfield in the freezing cold. Amy and John made it back to the shopping center, which was clearing out fast. They returned the motorcycle to the pickup, propping it up by the tailgate because they couldn't get it lifted into the bed. Maybe the owner would think it just fell out. Cars were filing out and heading up the highway because rumor was spreading around that they were going to expand the quarantine to include the shopping center and everything for a few miles on the other side of it. But who knew if it was true? The Greyhound was boarding, ready to just dump everybody off at the stops where they had been picked up. Amy thought she could get the driver to let John on board. The guy wasn't made of stone, but John thought that would make them too easy to find if that detective came after them. It made sense, and she got her bag and watched the bus lumber down the highway without them. It was the right decision, but they were now stranded. Amy would never be able to eat a Cinnabon again for the rest of her life. They sat there at the same table she was sitting at when she spotted John an hour earlier. John was on and off his intermittently working phone, first trying friends in town to see if they happened to be outside of city limits when everything went crazy. Those calls wouldn't even go through. Then he tried some people he knew outside of town, but the ones who answered had their own problems. Amy suggested getting a ride to the airport about 10 miles away and renting a car there, but John said he had some things on his driving record that would ensure he would never be able to rent a car for the rest of his life. And Amy didn't have a license, so that shot down that idea. It was just so freaking frustrating. David needed breaking out from a military zombie quarantine, and his saviors couldn't get a ride from Cinnabon. John paused in his phone calls to shove the remaining third of the cinnamon roll into his mouth when his phone rang. He picked it up and mumbled, "Munch, where are you?" John's friend Munch Lombard had not in fact fled the country in David's truck as John instructed him, but simply went to his parents' farm outside of town. He promised to come get Amy and John in 15 minutes or so, but John wasn't comfortable waiting at the shopping center that long, so they agreed to meet him at the John Deere dealership a mile up the street. They took off walking. Amy's left foot felt sticky, and she was pretty sure it was actively bleeding in her stupid shoes, but she said nothing because broken blisters were unimportant when the world was in crisis. She kept telling herself that over and over again, wincing with every step along the highway. Fewer and fewer cars passed them going north. More and more green trucks passed them going south. She was fairly sure that by sundown there would be more military personnel encircling Undisclosed than there were people inside of it. All of that between her and David. Soon, John was driving David's Bronco, Munch in the passenger seat, and Amy sitting in the smelly back seat. The truck had stunk of rotten eggs for years for reasons no one could explain. They turned off onto a gravel lane snaking into dense woods, the canopy of trees blocking the sun and fast-forwarding the clock to the mid-evening hours. The lane was barely wide enough for one vehicle, and Amy wondered what they did when two vehicles met going opposite directions. Did somebody just have to slowly back all the way out? Did they flip a coin to decide who? Amy tuned into the conversation between Munch and John to hear Munch say, "Yeah, I mean, they're playing that clip of the reporter's face getting eaten every 5 minutes." "What are they saying it is?" Some kind of virus. Maybe something the terrorists released. Eats your skin, eats your brain, makes you crazy." Jesus. That's the story they're putting out there to calm people down? That's really worse than just saying zombies. My dad and granddad have been huddled around the TV since it happened. They think it's Revelations. Though, I can't remember anything that messed up even in the Bible. The face-eating part, I mean. They rounded some trees and came to a closed gate, and behind it sat a shiny black pickup truck. Behind the wheel was a big guy with a dark beard and aviator sunglasses, who Amy thought looked like John Goodman's character in The Big Lebowski. Munch muttered a curse and got out of the Bronco. The guy stepped out of the black pickup, then reached inside and pulled out a shotgun. John got out, and Amy followed his lead, thinking that it had taken society all of 2 hours to degenerate to the shotgun stage. To the shotgun guy, John said, "Hey, Daryl." Daryl nodded curtly, but didn't answer. Then Munch said, "Come on, Dad. Don't embarrass me. Let us through." Shotgun guy, who Amy gathered was Munch's dad, and whose name was Daryl, unless John had gotten it wrong, said, "They're from in town, right? They were in the city when the outbreak happened?" John was. She wasn't. That's his friend, Amy. Amy waved. Daryl Shotgun said, "Make you a deal. Drive him back to the National Guard checkpoint they set up outside town. Let him check him over, and if they give him a clean bill of health, we'll talk. But until then, he ain't getting past this gate. Him and nobody else. We already had refugees wandering around here trying to see what they could steal." "Come on, Dad. They're homeless. They can't get back into town. They got nothing. They left everything behind. Don't be a dick." "Don't push me, Mitchell. We just talked about this." John said, "If it makes you feel better, if I was infected, you'd know it. I saw a guy get it right in front of me, and it took hold of him within 1 minute." "Who are you again?" Munch said, "God damn it, Dad. That's John, from the band. You've met him half a dozen times." Daryl nodded and said, "From the band, of course." John said, "Look, don't let me in. It's fine. But she needs a place to stay, and she was never in town. She was on her way in when they shut down the highway." Amy was about to speak up. She wasn't staying here with these nut jobs. The place had post-apocalyptic rape cult written all over it. Daryl rendered it moot. "Maybe she wasn't in the city, but she's been with you all day, right?" Munch laughed, shook his head, and said, "Unbelievable. Fucking unbelievable." John said, No, it's fine. I'm not trying to sow discord in your family here. I shouldn't have asked. We'll be on our way." Daryl said, "That's right, you will. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told everybody else who's coming up to this gate. Till a man in uniform comes and gives you all clear, and maybe not even then, if you show up here again, you ain't getting the courtesy of a warning shot." The look on John's face said he was wondering if he could get the shotgun away from Daryl and smash in his nose with the stock. Amy was pretty sure John could do it. The guy looked fat and slow. But then John snapped out of it, and they headed back to the Bronco. As they did a 3-point turn in the lane to head back out into the chaos, Amy sighed and said, "What now?" "Back to plan A. We head north. Put some distance between us and the bullshit. If we get caught and thrown in jail or quarantine, it's over. So for right now, the goal is not to do that." She crossed her arms and blew some dangling hair out of her eyes and said, "I don't like going farther away from him. I mean, David could be hurt or running away or who knows what. And we're just leaving him." John was silent for a moment, and Amy detected that there was something he wasn't telling her. But either he'd tell her, or he wouldn't. She'd learned that she couldn't press John like she could David. Every conversation took place on his terms. John said, "Oh, don't worry. We'll be back. But we're coming back strong. We're coming back to veto all this shit. We gotta load up first." And Amy thought, he doesn't believe that. The maps and shit. As they drove, instead of the highway, John only saw blood and brains splattered on a filthy blue plastic door. Book 2, an excerpt from Science and Beyond by Dr. Albert Marconi. For the concept of the zombie, we can think 2 parties, ants and a dog who probably died more than 10,000 years ago. Let us start with the dog. First, You must imagine humanity as it would have existed at that time. Agriculture is a new concept, a radical practice that must have seemed like magic. Settlements are becoming larger. Humans everywhere are struggling with the transition from living in sparse nomadic tribes hunting gazelle and gathering berries in the woods to everyday life in close proximity to dozens of strangers in something that would be called a village. All of this would have been a startling and hugely stressful change for our ancient ancestors. Yes, on one hand, there is suddenly more food and comfort and spare time than the species had ever known. But maddening complexity arises at every turn. Language explodes. Man evolves the ability to think in words, essentially creating an entirely new schematic for his brain with which he will create abstract thought for the first time. And along with it, questions. Man needs to understand his place in the universe and his relation to his creator. But this is not the beginning of science. It is the birth of superstition. What he does not understand, he fills in with this newfound cognitive power. The universe that this man inhabits will be one born from the astonishing new power called imagination. Already at this point, superstitions about the dead would have arisen. Decaying flesh is a playground for infectious disease and bacteria. Man would have long realized that too much time spent in the presence of the dead means sickness or even death for oneself. They find burying or burning the dead in a special place, away from the rest of the tribe, prevents this. So, one day, some nameless and now long forgotten man dies. He is buried in a shallow grave by his friends, as is now their custom. But along comes a dog, or a wolf, which smells under the loose soil the irresistible scent of slightly putrid meat. The dog digs and finds a hand. It pulls it up from the soil with its jaws, but then becomes distracted in its task and runs away. Along comes the deceased man's friends once more, and what do they find? A pale, dead hand, pushing up through the soil, as if clawing for the sky. Their friend, though still clearly dead, attempts to escape from his grave and walk. And thus the undead enter our cultural memory once and for all. That image of the pale, decaying hand emerging from the grave can still be found on endless movie posters and horror novels. From that primal fear would develop the mythology of the zombie and the vampire and countless other incarnations across time and cultures. But why does this haunt us so profoundly? After all, a shambling, decaying man should present less of a physical danger than a quick, strong, able-bodied man who wishes us the same harm. If anything, such a man would be easier to outrun, outwit, and eventually put down. Why would mankind spend 100 centuries obsessing over such an easily vanquished opponent? For the answer, we must look to the ant. As I alluded to, even before civilization began to emerge, agriculture must have seemed to early humans an inconceivably brazen attempt at playing God. Why? To refuse the nuts, berries, and game that were naturally placed before you by Providence, and to instead plant and grow your own. It would be the ancient equivalent of some mad scientist today promising to grow a child in a vat. This bitter divide among early man finds its way into our mythology with the story of Adam and Eve, the decision to abandon the self-sustaining garden in favor of food that only grows reluctantly from the ground by the sweat of thy face. But this kind of audacious assault on nature, an act not observed in any other of the world's creatures, required man to accept, or believe, if you prefer, that he was unique, blessed, divine. The planet is there for the taking, and he must believe that he is destined to subdue it. Thus, mankind embraces his identity as an eternal creation, as being above and beyond the physical. A being capable of choice, where all of the other beasts and fishes function according only to the simple arithmetic of crude instinct. A bear's actions can be boiled down to hunger or fear, but a man is capable of decision because he has this indefinable but all-powerful spark. This is what makes him a man. But then, man observes the ant. Clearly, no individual ant possesses this same spark. No ant ever created a work of art, or felt love, or loyalty. No ant ever thought through a decision. Ants mindlessly follow pheromone trails, to the point that if the leader forms a circle, the colony will follow it around and around, endlessly, until all have died from exhaustion. Yet, they create vast colonies, with separate chambers for the hatching of eggs and waste in storage. They grow and harvest fungi for food. The tunnels are designed with ventilation to the surface to carefully regulate temperature and air quality. A human would need years of formal study to learn all of the various principles and skills required to build a structure as complex as those created by the mindless ants. So what, then, makes humans so special? Of what good is this explosive wonder we call imagination, or the internal monologue we call our mind, our personality? Of what value is the divine spark that we believe grants us dominion over all, including those ants? All of our greatest achievements can apparently be duplicated without it. That is why we fear the zombie. The zombie looks like a man, walks like a man, eats and otherwise functions fully, yet is devoid of the spark. It represents the nagging doubt that lays deep in the heart of even the most zealous believer. Behind all of your pretty songs and stained glass, this is what you really are: shambling meat. Our true fear of the zombie was never that its bite would turn us into one of them. Our fear is that we are already zombies. 8 days, 12 hours, until the massacre at Firth Asylum. John noted that somebody could actually chart in miles per hour, the speed at which the panic and bullshit rippled outward from undisclosed. They left the highway to get gas about an hour north of the town, and at that point, everything still seemed just a couple of ticks off from normal. The convenience store was busy, but not crazy. John bought cigarettes and 2 Red Bulls and even chatted with the girl at the counter about what was going on. She talked him into getting a couple of hot dogs that had been slowly rotating in their warmer for a week or so. Amy grabbed a huge bag of strawberry Twizzlers and the biggest Diet Mountain Dew they had. Amy paid, and John promised to pay her back. Then he had a moment of panic when he wondered if the guy who wrote his paycheck every 2 weeks was even still alive, or if the bank where he had his checking account was still standing. If not, then what? He had nothing, just the clothes on his back. Then, when he and Amy stopped at another convenience store just 25 miles up the road, both of them urgently having to use the bathroom for different reasons, the place was a madhouse. The lines to the gas pumps led all the way to the street, blocking traffic as people waited to turn in. All of the bottled water, milk, and bread had been stripped from the shelves. An Indian guy behind the counter was arguing with somebody about a per-customer limit he had just imposed on everything in the store at that moment. Everyone was on their phones, yelling about packing up, getting the kids from basketball practice, heading to Mom's house. "Yes, now," they'd say. A curfew was coming. Martial law was going to be declared for the whole Tri-County area, or the whole state, or the whole country. Terrorist attack was the key word in all the conversations. A biological weapon, released by a cop who went crazy and became a jihadist. The stuff made the skin rot off your bones, ate through your brain, made you kill your family. Highly contagious. Countless infected may have gotten out of the town before the government sealed it off. We could all be infected for all we knew. Some thought this was what the government wanted. Some thought the government itself released the pathogen. John and Amy got out of there as fast as they could, not even stopping to buy a courtesy item, which Amy said was her normal policy when using the bathroom at a business. John said that was the kind of rule that got suspended during the apocalypse. John was trying to stay calm because Amy was getting worked up, and panic has a way of multiplying when you have two people's fear flowing back and forth, creating a feedback loop. She kept asking questions that he didn't have answers to. Wouldn't somebody from the government come looking for them for breaking quarantine? Wouldn't they know to look for the Bronco? He didn't know. They were heading back to her dorm at the university because they had literally nowhere else to go. But Amy kept asking questions about that, too. Wouldn't they come looking for them there? If the infected were dangerous, shouldn't they get some guns or something? John thought all of those were great questions, but he wasn't entirely clear what he was supposed to do about any of them. Say they dumped the Bronco. Then what? Walk? Steal a car? Yes, somebody would eventually come knocking at the dorm if they stayed there too long. Though, he thought the government had bigger fires to put out at the moment. But god damn it, they needed to stop somewhere and sit down and reorganize. He had just slept for a couple hours the night before, in a chair, at the police station. He just needed to reset himself. Definitely get something to drink. Yes, it would be nice to have the flamethrower, plus a shotgun and 10 or 20 boxes of shells. They didn't. He also didn't have the cash to buy a gun. But even if he did, he was pretty sure if they stopped at a Walmart, they would find the line to sporting goods wrapped around the store. All of the guns would be gone, along with all of the ammo and cleaning kits and knives. Also gone would be the camping supplies, the water purification tablets, the tanks of propane, the batteries, the hand-cranked emergency radios, and so on. This is a part of the country that created a nationwide ammunition shortage the day after they saw a non-white president win an election. They've been waiting for this shit. Not that John could criticize, because he knew better than any of them what was coming. What was really coming. And here he was, driving in the night in Dave's beat-up Bronco, without so much as a flashlight in the way of emergency supplies. Not that he would put it like that to Amy. God damn, he needed a drink. Just to get things back on an even keel. John cursed himself, or rather, he cursed the past version of himself for so thoughtlessly screwing over the current version of himself. Everything that would come in useful right now was in the trunk of his caddy. The caddy that was parked outside of the burrito stand the last time he saw it, but that by now was either impounded by the government, or stolen, or on fire, or flipped over in a riot. They were on the exit ramp headed to Amy's campus when her phone chimed to announce a text message by playing One Night in Bangkok, a private joke between her and Dave. Amy opened it, then scrunched up her face like she just watched a waiter at a restaurant slap a squealing live pig on the table in front of her. John said, "What?" "It's a text from David." She said nothing else. John's brain seized up. And she read it off her screen. "I want you to know that I am fine. They have asked us to stay here as a precaution. Ignore the rumors. Everything is fine and they are treating me well." John and Amy both were silent for several seconds. Finally, both burst out laughing. Amy said, "If David wrote that, I will eat this phone." John said, "They're treating me well?" I want you to seriously imagine those words coming out of Dave's mouth. He wouldn't say that even if they were treating him well. They might as well have had him speaking Japanese. I have his phone in my pocket, by the way. The laughter died as quickly as it had come, and Amy said, "Why would they send me a fake text?" I bet they sent them to everybody on the network, probably the same one, trying to pacify the people on the outside, to keep them from beating down the barriers to get into town. Think about it. You got husbands separated from wives, kids separated from parents. Imagine you go out of town to see a concert or something. You leave the kid with a babysitter, then head back home to find the road blocked by a wall of National Guard trucks telling you can't see your child, who, by the way, is trapped inside ground zero of a bioweapon outbreak. Do you have any idea how mad David will be when he sees this? Sending this out in his name like that? John didn't say anything. Just let that conversation fade. For now, the goal was to get her away, and safe, and to sit down somewhere quiet and figure out what to do next. Over a beer. The bullshit reached Amy's dorm ahead of them, so John's final estimate was that it traveled at about 80 miles an hour. Of course, bullshit picked up speed exponentially in the information age. The situation in Undisclosed would make a newscast in Japan within the next 2 hours, and internet rumors would assure everyone, everywhere, that they were all equally in danger of a terrorist/zombie attack. The common room on Amy's floor was packed with students, gathered around a TV mounted to the wall. It was tuned to CNN, which John guessed meant this was the most CNN anyone in this building had watched in years. It was clear from the coverage that nobody had gotten a camera crew inside the town after the Action 5 news team got eaten. They did have 3 short video clips that they showed on a loop, all of them shot with shaky cell phones and presumably uploaded to the web before all of the communication lines went dark. The first was the least exciting, showing a news crew of National Guard putting up temporary fencing around the hospital. They were working fast, using a huge drill thing attached to a backhoe to punch holes in the dirt while a crane filled said holes with poles 3 times as tall as a man. The view cut to a roll of absolutely sinister-looking razor wire on the ground, then to a group of guys standing guard, holding assault rifles that John recognized as M4s, as he had gone shopping for one last summer. Still no hazmat gear on those guys. Jesus. Finally, one of the soldiers shouted something at whoever was holding the camera, and the clip abruptly ended. Then, the next 2 clips were prefaced by the anchor, warning that the following scenes were very disturbing, and that you should leave the room if you were a giant pussy. They then cut to the second clip, shot from inside a car that was creeping along downtown, the driver presumably trying to steer while holding their phone out of the window to record what looked like some bodies laying in front of a smashed-up storefront. John recognized it as Black Circle Records on Main Street. It hadn't been smashed up quite as much as the last time that he saw it. The shot zoomed in on a mutilated body laying face down. Well, part of it was face down. The torso part. The pelvis was a twisted pink mess, and the legs were turned all the way around, so that they were toes up. Suddenly, one of the legs snapped into action, bending at the knee as if the legs were going to get up on their own and walk away without the rest of the body. The shot cut to black before we could see if they did. Finally, they cut to a grainy scene shot from an upper story window, looking down at the street below. There were 3 soldiers in a standoff with a lone guy who was holding a curved object that looked like a scythe. It was hard to make out from that distance. The soldiers were shouting commands at the guy, gesturing for him to get face down on the ground. He advanced on them, and they opened fire. All 3 of them. The clip had no audio, but you could see repeated puffs of gun smoke drifting into the air, and bits of flesh flying off the guy. He never went down. He didn't even stumble. Instead, he reared back and threw the scythe thing at the nearest soldier. The soldier grabbed his neck and went down. The other 2 soldiers ran. The camera view started shaking, which John interpreted as the cameraman going nuts and probably yelling to the other people in the room about what had just happened. This got the attention of the monster below, who turned and looked up, directly into the camera, and thus into the eyes of everyone in the dorm common room. The man reached into his coat and pulled out another scythe. John had a split second to realize he had actually pulled out one of his own ribs before he hurled it at the window, shattering it. Everyone in the common room flinched. The scene cut to black. A kid at the front of the room with black hair, a beard, and horn-rimmed glasses said, "Now tell me that wasn't a zombie." John's college career had been brief, and he had never lived in a dorm room. This one reminded him of a prison cell. Amy and her roommates slept in bunk beds. They had no TV. There was a bathroom and shower that they shared with the people in the next room. There was a little mini fridge next to the window, a hot plate sitting on top of it. Not even enough floor space to do a push-up. Not that he hadn't lived in worse. In one corner, John found a familiar sight, what he thought of as Amy's nest. At the center was an old beanbag chair that looked like it had come from a garage sale or a vintage store. Surrounding it was her Apple laptop, a rolled-up, half-empty bag of Cheetos, an open box of Cocoa Pebbles cereal that she would eat dry, and 4 empty bottles. Orange juice, Diet Mountain Dew, water. If she were at home, you would also find 2 prescription bottles there. 1 pain pill and 1 muscle relaxer that John knew she took for her back. She probably kept those in her purse. Shit like that would get stolen in a college dorm. You could sell Oxycontin for 10 or 20 bucks a pill here. Price would probably go up to 10 times now that the apocalypse was here. You stop that apocalypse shit. Keep your head, John. Amy had the lower bunk, which John knew because on the wall next to it, she taped up a little world map with a dozen cities in Europe and Australia bearing red stars she had drawn on with a Sharpie. Cities she wanted to visit someday. John noticed she had added a star to Japan since the last time he had seen it. He tried to imagine Dave walking around the streets of Tokyo. It was like picturing RoboCop in Middle-earth. John, you've met Nisha, right? John had. Amy's gorgeous Indian roommate. She was on the top bunk in pajama pants and a tank top, glued to her phone and tapping in Facebook updates. A bottle of absinthe leaned against the wall next to her. A textbook nearby served as a tray for an ornate glass, sugar cubes, and a disposable lighter. Saturday night. Nisha said, "Okay, I'm freaking out over this. Did you see that zombie video?" Amy said, "Yeah, it's crazy. David is still there, in the town." "Who?" "My boyfriend." "Oh, wow. I'm so sorry. Is he okay?" "We don't know. Nobody knows anything. John was there when everything happened. He just barely made it out." She looked at John. "Oh, wow. And he's not infected or anything, is he? He didn't get bit?" No, he was way away from everything when it happened. They actually let him out at the checkpoint. They checked him over and said he was fine." "Oh, well, that's good. But don't tell anybody, okay? People will freak out. You know how people are." "Oh, totally. Do you mind if he crashes on the floor tonight? Tomorrow we'll make some calls and go back and pick up David." Pick up David, John thought. Like he just needs a ride. John thought the absinthe looked like it had barely been touched. "Absolutely," said the roommate, even more oblivious. "Hey, Pizza Factory is doing their 2-for-1 thing tonight." John thought. Brains splattered on blue plastic. As Amy said, "Okay, yeah, we do need to eat. John, what do you take on your pizza?" A part of John realized this was crazy, but another part of him wondered if there would be such a thing as pizza in a week or a month from now. "John, meat. I want meat on it. All of the meat that they have." Amy sank into her beanbag chair and John noticed she called the pizza from speed dial. Nisha nodded to her absinthe bottle and said to John, "Want a drink with me?" Well, it would be rude not to at this point. 8 days, 1 hour, until the massacre at Firth Asylum. Amy couldn't help but notice that after John had gone on and on about how tired he was and how he had had no sleep because he was busy rescuing David the night before, he was still going strong at midnight. He and Nisha finished off the absinthe, but then Nisha went down the hall and came back with another bottle of some kind of liquor or another. It had a pirate on the bottle. John was getting talkative and was suddenly in action hero mode. "We need weapons. That's the first step," he said. "We may have to improvise something. All those assholes gotta pay." "Pay for what?" He was getting loud, and that made Amy nervous. Because, apocalypse or not, it was against building policy to have overnight visitors from off campus. And if the RA caught John in the room, she'd make him leave. And then what would he do? Sleep in the truck? But now, he and Amy's roommate were getting drunk and downing pizza and making a party out of it. Everybody deals with crisis differently, I guess. They asked Amy if they could use her laptop, and they both huddled over it, refreshing the news websites and all of the social networking hubs over and over and over again, even though nothing new was coming out of Undisclosed, and Amy was pretty sure nothing new would come out until daytime. If nobody had reporters on the inside and the phone lines were down, then all that was coming out were the stupid rumors. Sitting there and sucking up the rumors wasn't doing anyone any good. It was just following the crisis as a form of entertainment. The crisis that David was stuck right in the middle of. Amy didn't think either of them even noticed when she got up, put her jacket on, and walked out. There were still a lot of people in the common room. The channel got switched to Fox News, and a panel of experts were desperately trying to fill airtime by finding ways to rephrase the nothing that they knew, over and over again. She thought it was fascinating how the coverage on the internet and the coverage on TV were from alternate universes. TV was all terror, terrorist, Al-Qaeda. And the internet was zombies, zombies, zombies. Amy just kept walking toward the elevator and headed down, out of the building. She needed air. The campus was buzzing. The hot dog truck was pulled up in front of the building, and there was a line 3 wide and 10 deep in front of it. Amy walked past because she wanted to wish Spiro, the hot dog guy, a happy birthday. His was one of the over 200 birthdays programmed into the calendar app on her phone. He smiled and told her the hot dogs were free tonight, 1 per customer. Not because of his birthday, but because of the other thing. She passed a flyer posted to a utility pole with a huge letter Z on it, which she ignored. But then she passed another one, and another. Then she arrived at the visitor's parking lot and found one under the windshield of David's truck, and all of the other cars, and read it. Meeting. Z. Powder keg. 2nd Street, every day at noon. Survival, basic weapons training, general preparedness. It's here. Be ready. Zombie nerds. They probably had the flyers already made up for this. There was nobody creepier than the zombie nerds. College guys who not only watched zombie movies and read zombie novels and played zombie video games, but actually formed clubs and collected zombie-killing weapons. Gun shops around there actually stocked zombie targets and special zombie bullets with glow-in-the-dark tips. Not toy bullets, mind you. These guys would go out into the woods and train and shoot and defend to the death their right to stay in childhood until age 35. She climbed inside the truck. She wasn't going anywhere. She had never learned to drive. Her car accident happened not long before she would have been due to take her driver's ed courses in high school. She never got back around to it after she went back to school, and now the thought of it terrified her. She didn't know how anybody did it. Hurtling down the highway at 65 miles an hour while a barrage of other cars come flying towards you like huge cannon shells, whipping past in the next lane, just 5 feet from your own squishy body. If at that moment one of you nudges your steering wheel at the wrong time, 2 seconds later, your body is a bunch of spaghetti wrapped around bundles of twisted steel. She'd yell at David for eating while he drove, a Coke between his legs and a hamburger in one hand, steering with 2 fingers at night. It's like nobody in the world gets how fragile life is, how fragile our bodies are. Amy got the crying to stop about 10 minutes later. Her tear ducts were getting sore. She turned the flyer over and found a pen in her purse. She held the flyer to her thigh with the stump of her left wrist and began writing with her right. She was making a list. 1. Call the Centers for Disease Control. John said that's who was on the scene of the house fire, which made sense because this was sort of a disease. If so, at some point they had to establish a hotline for people to get in contact with their loved ones inside quarantine. There'd be riots otherwise. They were still Americans. There was still such a thing as the Constitution. All she needed them to do was confirm that David was okay, even if she wasn't allowed to see him or talk to him. 2. Exhaust all means of contacting David. One way or the other, it didn't seem plausible that the government could really shut down all forms of communication, not in the 21st century. She could have John post a message to him on his blog. She would post on Facebook. She would email him. She would try the cell again. Write a paper letter addressed to the undisclosed quarantine operation sent, "Attention, David Wong." It was driving her crazy, not knowing. Where was he right now, at this moment? Wandering free around town? In a temporary CDC plague tent or something? Crashing at John's old place? She thought for a moment, then jotted down. 3. If David is in CDC custody, get him a care package. His house had burned down. That meant he needed everything. Clothes, heartburn pills, replacement contact lenses in case he lost one, dandruff shampoo, some Oreos, a book. One more idea occurred to her. It should have come to her sooner. She wrote, 4. Contact Marconi. Marconi, if you haven't heard of him, was Dr. Albert Marconi. He wrote books and hosted a show on the History Channel about monsters and ghosts and stuff. David and John knew him because their paths had crossed a few times. If anybody knew what to do, he would. Heck, he was probably on his way here. Probably started calling his producer and packing his bags the moment that zombie video hit the news. Then, with resolve, Amy filled in the last item. 5. If none of the above can be done, get into the quarantine. Getting out of a quarantine was hard, but getting in would be the easiest thing in the world, right? All you had to do was show up and say you were infected. She wouldn't even need to lie. She had spent 12 straight hours with somebody who was at outbreak ground zero. Just tell them that. Instant ticket in. The problem would be figuring out how to find David once she was in there. If the government had him somewhere, they may not allow them to stay together since they're not married. If they didn't have him, finding where he was in town could be a chore. Still, just being inside the city would put her 90% closer. She folded up the paper and put it in her purse. There. Now she had a plan. She felt better. She would get some sleep and get a fresh start with John tomorrow. 7 days, 13 hours, until the massacre at Firth Asylum. Amy started trying to wake up John at 9 a.m. He didn't get up until 2 p.m. He was cranky and despondent. When she suggested calling Dr. Marconi and asked him if he had a phone number for him, John mumbled that he would take care of it. After she reminded him 6 more times over the next 2 hours, finally he got on her laptop and started doing something or other, which she took as progress until she leaned over him and realized he was on the freaking website for Marconi's TV show trying to find the phone number. She could have done that 8 hours ago. John wound up calling a number that she was pretty sure was for ordering DVD box sets of Marconi's show and leaving a rambling voicemail that no sane human being would ever respond to. Then, the rest of that evening was spent trying to find John a place to stay. But all of the hotels in town were booked with people unable to get back home to undisclosed, and all the news media converging on the area. They wound up having to put him up in a motel an hour away, so now John would have to make a 2-hour round trip every time they needed to do anything. So here are all the other people running around in a panic trying to stock up to survive the end of the world, and Amy and John were farting around trying to find a hotel, and... ugh. She wasn't going to cry. Oh, and Amy paid for everything. John said he was expecting a paycheck from the temp job he had working for a DJ doing parties and weddings and stuff. But of course, said DJ lived in undisclosed. So who knows if he got out, or if he was dead, or if he was a monster. So anyway, that was Sunday. Gone. 6 days, 18 hours, until the massacre at Firth Asylum. Amy had taken to avoiding the common room because there was almost a party atmosphere there. Sure, people would talk about it like it was this big national tragedy, but you could tell they were into it, like it was something they could seize on to break up the routine. Just one more bit of drama that played out on the big common room TV. The big news Monday morning was that the government had scheduled a press conference, the first one since all of this happened. It was also streamed on the internet, so Amy could follow it from her phone in her dorm room, away from the spectators. The stream on her phone was delayed by 7 or 8 seconds for whatever technical internet reason, so it created a weird effect where she could faintly hear the guy leading the news conference say a line down the hall before he'd say it again on her phone a few seconds later. She was alone. John was at the hotel and her roommate was down the hall with the crowd. First, the guy, a middle-aged guy with a young George Clooney haircut, announced a phone hotline they had set up, but said to please not call with inquiries about loved ones. The number was purely to report that you or someone you knew were showing symptoms of infection, so they needed to keep those lines free since containing infection had to be first priority. He read off the number and Amy hurriedly dug the zombie flyer out of her purse and jotted it down. The guy also said they had set up a patient treatment facility at the undisclosed hospital, and that all infected and suspected infected were being transported there and given the best care possible. In the meantime, they were imposing a strict sundown curfew in the city, and they would be going house to house to check for infected individuals. The guy was good at his job. Amy found herself actually feeling better. As horrible as John had described the situation and what they had seen, this guy here seemed on top of it. Then, something weird happened. The guy was winding down the press conference with some generic lines about how they were busily researching the outbreak and urged people to neither believe nor spread irresponsible internet rumors. Then, CNN abruptly cut back to the anchor, and everybody in the common room screamed their heads off. This completely baffled Amy, as the anchor was just a lady in a pantsuit. But then she remembered the delay. She had 5 solid seconds to tense up her whole body while she waited to see what they had seen. The anchor quickly said that they had exclusive new video that had just leaked from Outbreak Ground Zero. And in the middle of her sentence, they cut to a grainy video, shot from inside a car at night. The chaos had already started before they got the camera up. There were screams and confused shouts from within the car, inhuman growls from outside. Glass shattered. A fist punched through. A grotesque face biting at the cameraman. A flash of light and a pop filled the interior of the car. A gunshot. The monster recoiled from the window. There were plenty more behind it, 4 or 5 hands now pushing in through the glass. More gunshots. A female voice in the car screamed, "Drive! Drive!" Squealing tires. Another relieved voice rasped, "Oh my God. Oh my God. That was so close." The view swung across the street. Amy thought she saw a reddish dog trot past. She thought, Molly? The woman holding the camera phone had rested her arm so that the camera was now pointing at her lap, but continued recording. That's why the viewers knew she was doomed before she did. While the woman held a nervous conversation with the driver, a crimson stain started forming across her abdomen. Then a puckered hole formed in her belly, like she was being shot from behind by the world's slowest bullet. Guts spilled out onto her lap. A tangle of wet sausages. The woman screamed. The clip cut to black. Amy shut off her phone. She breathed. She called John and got his voicemail. She paced around her dorm room for a few minutes, trying to think of what to do next. Then she went into the bathroom and threw up. 6 days, 6 hours, until the massacre at Firth Asylum. John saw Amy's messages piling up on his phone, and by Monday night, he wanted to throw the thing through the fucking window. He knew how serious the fucking situation was. He could turn on a TV or look out his window. His motel was down the block from a Pentecostal church, and he could see people piling through the door on a Monday. And oh, by the way, he wanted to say he had been friends with David for 10 years before Amy even knew his fucking name. John felt the loss in ways she couldn't even conceive. He didn't need her calling him every 5 seconds to tell him to do what exactly? John had promised himself he wouldn't drink today. He had overdone it Saturday night. But by Monday evening, he started to have that swimmy flu feeling in his head and gut, and realized it was stupid to try to put himself through rehab on a week when he needed to be 110%. He'd stick to beer, though. That much, he decided. He got a 12-pack and settled in for the night in the motel room, watching the news carefully for updates. He'd call Amy tomorrow.